What's up, boss? This is Abraham's wallet. We span the gap between the austerity of obedience to God and the prosperity rising from faithfulness. Run your home and your dough like a biblical boss.
Well, Mark, today I think we're going to get into a subject which I think is going to be kind of an evergreen for our listeners. I think they're probably going to want to know that this episode exists and come back to it over and over when their life calls for it. Everybody experiences what we're going to be talking about today, and everybody needs a little arm around them and some counsel when it happens. Today, we're talking about how to take a loss. Now, would you care to share with our people what was the impetus for us putting these notes together and talking about this subject today?
I thought we were talking about how to take a punch. I totally prepared for how to take a punch.
And you want to go with the direction of the punch, is that right? You want to soften the blow by moving with it?
I like to lean into it and surprise them, meet them a little bit farther forward. You lose more teeth that way, but you
hurt their knuckle a little more.
It shows that you're not scared.
Okay.
So I think it was actually while we were recording last week.
Yes.
I have been kind of sniffing around the crypto space for a while, thinking, a lot of these custodians that are supposedly holding crypto for people and paying interest on that crypto. It doesn't totally smell right because they're loaning it out basically on margin, and people have to pay it back at some point. Well, if they've loaned enough out and the price goes down enough, it's kind of like when a stock brokerage lets you purchase on margin, and then the stock price drops and you were expecting it to go up, which is why you borrowed shares. When the stock price drops a bunch, they do what's called a margin call. And they say, you have to give us more money or you have to close out this position. Well, that happened at a very large scale with Voyager, which was one of the platforms that you and I both were using for some low-level crypto playing and things like that. And the house of cards basically fell down, meaning that everything got locked up. And some people that I've talked to since then told me, well, it just said they were suspending trading temporarily until they can sort things out. I don't think that's the case. I actually read an article today that was trying to make the argument that people who had crypto and other assets on there would get 80% of what they invested back, which would be delightful. However, I think 5% is more likely. So we're still trying to figure out how much of the assets that were on this platform we might get back someday. But it's a very real possibility that the answer is 0. And so we both were not feeling our best as we talked through the reason why Abraham's wallet exists.
Yes.
And if you heard that episode and there was just a melancholy cloud over Steven,
a little
why.
greener gills.
He wasn't even you weren't even thinking about the money you lost as much as the conversation you would be having with your spouse.
That's really true. I was reminded very quickly of the Texas oil well that we invested mightily in, and the guy running the whole operation died on us. And then after he died, we found out it was all a sham. Everything he was doing was a sham. And I had personally been to the wells. I'd seen them pumping oil out of the ground. And it was still all it was all a put on, and
wow.
That didn't create a sense of confidence in my wife, in my forays. Now, of course, we're going to say it's not like we're putting the family farm into these risky ventures, as we've been saying all along the way, even when crypto was in its infancy and sounding very rosy. we had always said 2 to 3% of your investment dollars should go to something that seems a little risky. It seems like a fringe deal. And I'm here to say on the record, thank you, Mark, for being the level head. I always want to jump into things with both feet. And you talked me off the ledge and said, be circumspect with the dollars. I'm not going to let you put too much in there. And we can live through these losses, but they're never fun. And everybody goes through them. And anybody who actually takes risks and actually tries to go out there, they're going to experience losses at some point. So that's what we want to talk about today.
The thing that came to my mind was I had a real bad day around age 27 when I was working at Freddie Mac. And I had received quite a bit of compensation in equity, so stock in the company. And I also, on top of that, had purchased more preferred stock, which is kind of like a high dividend stock that doesn't perform exactly like equity does. But I remember waking up one day at maybe 5 or 6 in the morning with about 50 emails from people at work saying, hey, the Secretary of the Treasury just kicked the door down and is standing here, and I think they're going to shut us down. And I then jumped over to my brokerage account to say, what in the world? And the stock had gone from about $50 a share to about 1/10 of 1 penny per share.
Oh,
And it was a 6-figure loss that I sustained at age 27, um, between the preferreds and the equity. And ever since then, I've been in spots where I was like, you just you don't count your chickens before they hatch, if you will. I know a lot of our listeners work at like startups. So I worked at a startup where I was patted on the back and told, Mark, you have $2 million worth of equity in this company because we are getting this new round of capital and look how much we're valued at. And I'll tell you how much that $2 million ended up being worth by the time we were done. And it's zero.
mm.
So, this one felt a little bit more painful in some ways because it was like real money that I had put in the bank, not in the bank, but into an investment. Whereas these other things were more a part of my compensation at various jobs. So that didn't feel quite as personal. But I'm just trying to say I have experienced some loss in my days. And going back to our opener, I feel like I've learned how to take a punch pretty well in a financial sense.
Great. Well, we're going to give people, I think, about 6 or 7 tips for dealing with things. And let's just walk through our list here. You can pick any tip you want out of the list and share them. But I'm going to start at a place where I would think people would expect us to. People who are aware of 5 capitals. That's where I'm going to start, at the top of the list. And yes, I do believe that there is spiritual work to be done when you take a financial loss. It could be, and by the way, when I talk about taking a loss, it could be that you've totaled a car. It could be that you've lost a job. Whatever your big loss is, I think these
Or a
things
cat? No.
maybe not a cat,
Okay.
but think in terms of I'm thinking this is going to be applicable to people if we lose another 20% in the market in the coming year, or people, whatever it is that you have to process to go like, I had this hope, I was building towards this thing, the bottoms fall. It could be you started a business and you had $15,000 of running room, and you spent all that money and the clients never came, and you have to fold up shop and you can't renew the lease, and that kind of thing. That kind of loss is what I'm thinking of. So I do believe that there is a spiritual component that you have to tackle right up top. I honestly believe, I know that this might sound cartoony to think I would actually go here first, but I actually think it's the first thing that you should do when it really hits you. I'm in trouble. This isn't going to work out. Is that you have to deal with I know that there are emotions that go along with this. I'm not talking about the emotions. I'm talking about there's an actual spirit of guilt and shame and maybe self-hatred that comes in. And so I think shame is probably the easiest way to deal with it. I mean, I certainly had my tail between my legs when I went to talk to my wife. We'll talk about that later. Just feeling like, oh, because my mind went to the oil investment and thinking, I did it again. I tried. I thought this seemed like a safe venture. For me, the most bummer thing about what we experienced was that it wasn't that we invested in a company that went belly up. It's that we thought we had an actual asset. I thought I had tangible assets of, for instance, Bitcoins. And now I don't have those Bitcoins anymore. And that is, it's like investing in gold and then somebody dug up your gold and it's all gone. So I just want to make this point. Shame is an evil spirit. Okay. That this is different from guilt over sin, actual sin. If you go gambling and you lose the rent money for the month, you should feel guilt because you have sinned against your family and you should repent and apologize and all those things. I'm talking about the feeling of shame. This is a feeling that can be connected to sin, but I don't think it's a sin to have invested in something in good faith and have it go belly up. It's an evil spirit that was introduced into the world for the first time in Genesis 3 at the fall of man. And we can see this shame that Adam felt because he didn't want to relate to God anymore. He wanted to go away and hide. And that shame keeps you, I want you to hear this because it's so important. You might feel like, well, it's kind of like healthy for me to get my wings clipped a little bit and not feel like I'm all that. It's not humility. Shame isn't humility. It's something that makes you feel that I don't deserve to be connected to God. Is the last thing. Shame leads to a terror of God. Meaning, if God ever got a hold of me, He would at the least spank me, and He might destroy me because I'm so worthless. And there's an interesting verse in Job 10:15, and Job was feeling shame, and he said this: even if I'm innocent, I can't lift my head because I'm full of shame. So the shame he was experiencing wasn't based on the truth. He said, even if I'm innocent, I can't lift my head because I'm full of shame. Well, we want to agree with the truth. Okay. So shame wants to keep you down, wants to keep you having a terror of God and a feeling that you're unworthy in some way. And just to have a reference for this, I'll throw out Psalm 25:3, which says, "He who hopes in the Lord," and we're going to talk about reorienting your hope. "He who hopes in the Lord will never be filled with shame." That's a great verse. That doesn't mean you're never going to sin. Doesn't mean you're never going to make a mistake. It means that this filthy blanket of shame, which is there to destroy your confidence and your hope, to destroy your sense of I'm a son of God and I'm worthy because He says I am. We got to get rid of that thing. And the other thing I'll put my finger on that you should deal with spiritually up front is fear, because that quickly comes in whenever there's any degree of trauma in your life. Fear wants to get right in and say to you, we'll never do this again. I am never going down this road again. It's the thing that keeps you from wanting to get behind the wheel of a car. If you've been in a car accident, you go like, I'm never driving on it because it's danger everywhere. Well, that's not true. There's not really danger everywhere, but having been part of something that was traumatic makes you feel like it's right around the corner. So about both of those things, I won't do a big teaching on repentance here, but it's good to acknowledge to God, okay, look, I'm dealing with shame and I'm dealing with fear right now. I just confess it. And I agree, God, you see my heart. You see what's happening in me. And I want to agree with you that it's there. And I don't want it to be there. So I'm asking you to just clear me of it. And in place of fear and shame, I just want to be reminded in my heart and in my mind of the worthiness that I have because you love me and because you say I'm worthy, and the fact that I'm going to live my life based in faith and not based on fear. So that's what I would say right up top, is that let's deal with those spiritual realities. If I were with you physically while you're processing through this moment and need some encouragement, I would remind you that Jesus said in Luke 12:15 that a man's life does not consist of the abundance of his possessions. And of course, here at Abraham's Wallet, we believe that God wants you to prosper. We believe that if you're faithful over the long haul, it leads to wealth of at least 5 kinds, etc. We believe in all those things. And the fact remains that things go south and that life doesn't always work the way that we want it to. But I would just remind you, just remember that the main thing in your life is being conformed into the image of the Son. And it's not the scorecard at the end of your life will not be, did you make the most of every dollar that came in your way? Have you lost $0? That's just a good thing to remember. If you think, okay, I can do an ego thing on myself where I go like, oh, I thought I was so smart and savvy, I would never lose. And losing sometimes that's part of the deal. So another couple of tips: remember to be grateful for everything in your life. Deuteronomy 8 describes our being grateful that we even have enough money to invest, that you have the opportunity to start a small business, maybe that failed, that you have the brain power and the energy to go venture in any sort of way. I want to present my life to God and say, everything that I have, I tried to be a good steward of what you gave to me. And it's just a reaction of mine to go to God and go like, I'm sorry. Things took a bad turn here, and I'm sorry. And yet I need to be reminded by you that the scorecard at the end is more about faithfulness and heart toward God than it is, did everything succeed? I think those are very important to remember. God, what I did in faith. I leave the results to you. I try to be as wise as I can, and still I can't see everything the way that you do. So you got to turn those things over to God.
Do you have any tips or even what not to do of how you shared this particular news and past losses? Are we going there?
Yes. So you were talking about the second capital, which is relationally, and the most important one would be with your spouse. So I thought of 4 things in this space, with particularly sharing with your spouse. The first one that I would say, which is take the low place and humble yourself. So if you did the first thing and you've actually dealt with God on it and you've kind of processed through, okay, I know you still love me. I know you don't call me a loser and a failure, and this is part of the process. And by the way, I'll interrupt here and say I was kind of talking about this story, not exactly the episode. Hey, we're going to talk about this, but just this event with my mom. And my mother told me about, and some of you have heard previous episodes with my father and all of the crazy stories of his life. My mom told me a story of my dad coming home one night and telling my mom, and this is like in 82, 83. So I can only guess what this money was worth, that he had written a check for $25,000. They were not rich people. That was a heck of a lot of money to them, because a friend at work had told him about this sure thing, some kind of stock tip around the water cooler. The next day, it went to zero. The next day, I was like, was he busted up about it? And she's like, oh, he was so torn up about it and felt so horrible. And anyways, my first tip would be just take the low place with your spouse. And if you have done this previous work of dealing with God, receiving forgiveness if you need to, kind of getting shame off of you, then you should be able to go to your spouse without this kind of plaintive, would you support me right now? Because I'm feeling kind of unsure about myself. That we get into that problem a lot with our wives. And it would be better if we could go to them having already dealt with God, say, come with this low place, humble attitude. I have bad news and I feel horrible about it. And I just got to tell you, I mean, I got us into something that blundered or whatever. My wife was well aware that we were in crypto, and she was always shrugging her shoulders about it. So I would take the low place in a humble way, and then this sounds crazy, but I think it's wise just sit there and just take whatever venting happens as a result of it. Oh, I didn't think we should do that. Oh, why do you always get us into these messes? Whatever she needs to say, maybe she'll have more self control than that, but maybe she won't. And whatever she needs to say, just let her vent. That's part of your job as a shepherd, I think. Let her vent. Try, fellas. I wish I could put my hands on your shoulders. Try to not get defensive about it or take it personally, and just let her say whatever she needs to say to react. I think it would be great if you could then talk her through the time that you had with God, and say to her, I'm disappointed as you are, and I was really struggling, and I started feeling sick at my stomach. Now I'm quoting myself what I said to my wife. I started to feel sick at my stomach, and I started thinking like, I'm too smart to have things like this happen to me. And I thought I had already experienced all the failure that I need to experience, et cetera, et cetera. And so I prayed about it, and I went back to this verse, and I felt like God said this, and I was reminded that this is the point of life. Now, she might not say, that is so encouraging, honey. You are so spiritual. This is a wonderful moment. Can we pray together? She might suck her teeth and roll her eyes and go, yeah, thanks for spiritualizing, the $20,000 that we just lost. I don't know how she'll respond, but just invite her into your process. And then please, for goodness sake, try to not get defensive, and try not to take it personally. And my little last tip that I think is helpful around this point would be to reassure her, fellas, your wife has entrusted her life to you. I know you did the same thing. I know that. I've performed weddings, plenty of them. I know how it works. But she has entrusted her life to you, and she is trusting you to lead. And the fact is that you're not going to lead. Every single place that you lead is not going to turn up roses. That's just the facts. So it'll be very good for you to reassure your wife. Now, you can't lie to her and say, I will never make any more mistakes for as long as we live. You can't say that, but you can reassure her that, like, I take responsibility for this. I will work as hard as I need to make sure that we are financially secure. Again, I'm disappointed like you are. With God's help, I'm going to be wiser about our future ventures. And I just want you to know I take responsibility, and I won't roll over. I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to say, well, we can't fight chance, all of that nonsense. Just say, like, I'm here for you, and I'm taking responsibility. I think that's about as good as you can do in that kind of a situation. What do you think?
Just thinking through the conversation that I had here, the facts of the matter were not very important in that conversation.
For sure.
Because the initial reaction, like you said, was displeasure. And we own a bunch of other assets, and they go up and down in value all the time. And I'm like, okay, this is how much we lost, but we made that much yesterday when the stock market was up. Now, we didn't actually make it because we didn't sell anything, but this is my inner instinct was to come with, hey, this isn't that big of a deal because I've hedged our risk and appropriately exposed us here, and all that. That wasn't the helpful advice in that moment. So, but what I would say is it was helpful a little bit later. So, what are we gonna do now? Because that seems like a lot of money. Well, honey, let me remind you that we have a financial plan, and it incorporated that we would have losses like this. So there was a time not to bring in that data, and then there was a time where that data was actually very helpful. And I never heard from her again in terms of like anger,
Yeah,
because she went, "Oh, well, when you put it in that context, fine, onward." I
that's
think
cool.
if you don't have that, a lot of people that are listening to this don't have that plan.
Yes,
They can't go to their spouse and go, "Well, honey, we did just lose whatever, $10,000, but I've got a plan and it's not derailed by such a thing." If
yeah,
you don't have that, you really should. And it doesn't have to be a professionally produced um, financial plan that goes and uses all the fancy software that we use, but you should have a general plan that says this is how much we're going to invest over time, and we know kind of we're going to take a few Barry Bonds swings for the fences, but for the most part we're going to invest in boring stuff that has a reliable rate of return, and um, that will give you the tools you need, I think, to say, hey, here's where we're at, even in the midst of big losses. I think that can be helpful even if you are investing in boring stuff and the stock market drops 20%. That can be a huge amount of money. Maybe you just have a 401k and it was $100,000 and now it's 80. Well, that can be disconcerting
of
unless you
course.
have a plan that says, "Oh, we knew that in some years this was going to happen, and in some years we're going to have huge years, and neither one should change our emotional well-being, because over the long term we have a plan." So that's just me kind of plugging the value of being able to zoom up to 30,000 feet when things like this happen and go, did anything fundamentally change? If the answer is no, then we go, that's a real bummer, and we move on. If the answer is yes, we might need to change our long-term plan. There are losses that can change a long-term plan. Losing a business might change the planning you need to do, and it might say, hey, we actually need to rework some of our plans. But if you haven't even done the work to sort of map out what you're after financially and what you can expect over the long term, things like that, then it's hard to have that in your pocket for times like this.
Great point. And we're going to get to regrouping financially at the end of this discussion and what to do about that. But I think having a plan is probably near the top of that list of things to do. So, and certainly brings comfort to yourself and to your family, which is, hey, we do have a plan here. One other thought on relationally, relationship wise. An old maxim is a problem shared is a problem halved. And so we wrote an article way back in the day. I think you probably wrote it about having a board of directors. And that's people in your life that you trust, that know your financial situation, are pulling in the same direction you are, and you can be explicit about your finances with. Again, I'll speak from experience and say just to have 2 or 3 friends that know everything about my world, their eyes aren't going to bug out. You invested that much, you have that big of a 401k, and they're also not going to laugh at you for having taken a big loss. Just to have some friends that you can talk to that will sympathize with you. It actually means a huge amount to have somebody just emotionally put their arm around you and say, hey, man, life happens to all of us. And I'm sorry for you that happened. It's actually a big deal to kind of reorient yourself to reality and get past things. So I just throw that in again, like it's humbling, of course, to share with a friend, but I'd rather my friends knew the real me and what's actually going on. I just came here from sitting down at coffee with somebody who, and of course, this is somebody I hadn't seen in a couple of months. And what's the first question? How are you really doing? And when I get asked that question, I always size up like the last week and sort of summarize like, well, it hasn't been a perfect last week, and so I'm gonna tell that story. So it's a friend I trusted. So relationships. Well, let's move on into our thinking. I'll just say that I think there are some things to remind ourselves of when we're as we're thinking about taking a loss. And there's really a main one thought that if you just went through it, if you just, I don't know what happened, something got repossessed. I don't know. I would just say to you as a friend, I would want you to remember that if you're in the venturing and faith and building business, that ventures entail risk. And reiterate to yourself, we're not going to shrink back. Again, if we get rid of fear, I want to have the attitude that we're not going to just try to minimize our losses for the rest of our lives. No, that's not what we're about. We are not those kind of men. If I can assign Hebrews 10:39 to us, we are not the kind who shrink back and are destroyed. On the contrary, we keep trusting and thus preserve our lives, is one translation of Hebrews 10:39. We keep trusting and we thus preserve our lives. And if you are in the following Jesus and building a godly home business, you are in the faith business, which means we're trusting in things that we can't see. We will sometimes put our foot out there into the darkness and find, oh, I took a misstep. Okay, that's not the end of the world. It's okay. But we're not going to shrink back from all risks from here forward. Yes, we're going to get more savvy. Yes, we're going to be more shrewd. And maybe it's applicable that you took a wrong turn and you should be more suspicious and more leery going forward. But we are going to continue to take measured risks. So I can't think of this topic. I can't even say that sentence without thinking of this passage. I'm going to read this. I'm going to read more of this passage than I think we've read in any context before. This is one of our favorite little passages about investing, and it's where you find diversification in the Bible. It's Ecclesiastes chapter 11. Here's what it says. Cast your bread onto the surface of the waters. And the Amplified says, be diligently active and make thoughtful decisions, because you will find it after many days. Give a portion to 7, or even divide it to 8, for you do not know what misfortune may occur on the earth. Isn't that interesting that God puts that in the word? Hey, you don't know what's coming tomorrow. You don't know what misfortune is coming your way. So it says, cast your bread on the water in 7 and 8 divisions. If the clouds are full of, this is verse 3, if the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. And if a tree falls toward the south or toward the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it lies. He who watches the wind, waiting for all conditions to be perfect, will never sow seed. And he who looks at the clouds will not reap a harvest. Just as you don't know the way and path of the wind, and you don't know how bones are formed in the womb of a pregnant woman. Interesting phrase there, verse 5 of Ecclesiastes 11. Just as you don't know how the bones are formed in the womb of a pregnant woman, even so you do not know the activity of God who makes all things. So sow your seed in the morning, and don't be idle with your hands in the evening, for you don't know whether morning or evening planting will succeed, whether this or that, whether both alike will be good. So I love that passage. I hope it reinstates some courage in you to go like, okay, even if we get snake bit and we learn, okay, don't go down that path anymore, but I got a little wiser here. And the Jewish reading of that passage is that we must invest up to 6 or 7 or 8 times in various things before we become savvy. Now, of course, we wouldn't encourage you to randomly write checks to anybody that walks in your door for but you're going to learn as you go. You're going to be more shrewd as you go. But we can't stop taking risks. This is part of what we've been made to do. We're going to step out in faith. We're going to believe, and we can't be among people who shrink back.
Yeah, it's interesting too that verse calls out that specific number. I mean, it's very close to the number that we always talk about in venture capital investing with, when you're going to invest in these high risk new business opportunities, you assume that you need to invest about 10 times, because out of 10, one of those investments is going to be a grand slam.
Mm.
A couple of them are going to return your investment to you, meaning if you put, I don't know, if you're a venture capitalist, if you put $10 million in, you'll get $10 million back. And then the rest of them will go to zero.
Mhm.
You and I have both invested in small businesses that other people started.
Mhm.
And I all the time, this is a place where I get people coming to me and saying, Mark, I've got my friend starting a business. I've got an opportunity to put some money in. Should I do it? And I say, as long as you can do it 10 times, then I'm all for it. But that's kind of this is one of the reasons we started Abraham's Wallet, is because the Bible actually instructs us on some best practices for how to handle
Yeah.
resources, and one of them is scatter upon the water multiple times.
Yep.
Don't just dump all of your money into one thing. And when you approach things that way, you also don't have that step one shame feeling when something loses,
Right.
because you go,
That's
oh,
exactly right. This is one of my learnings.
I expect that I'm going to have a, 300 batting average here, and so it's not remotely shocking to me when I strike out on any particular at bat, as long
Great
as
point.
I kind of plan accurately. So, can
That
you hear
is,
the planning? The planning that's
I
very
love it.
important to me.
That is so good. Um, to say to yourself, I'm going for a 300 batting average. I mean, I hope your average is better than that on your finances, but to think, okay, I struck out this one. Well, back to the drawing board. How can I learn from this? And
Well,
that's part of the plan.
yeah, and 300 batting average is if we're investing in early stage startups, right?
Right.
That's different because one of them, your $10 million investment, if
It's
you're a
100x.
venture capital, is going to become $1 billion,
Right,
and
right, right.
then that's fine. If it's not for you and I and our 401ks, we're not trying to bat 300 there. There
That
we are actually, somebody posted on Twitter today, and I liked the tweet. They said, you don't need a high risk tolerance to invest wisely in the stock market. You just need a high variance tolerance, meaning you need to be comfortable with ups and downs. But over time, history says it's not actually very risky.
Right.
So, yeah, I'm not saying that we all are going to lose in 70% of our investments. I am saying that in certain types of investments, and I think we're learning that DeFi crypto lending would be one of those. Your betting average might be at best 30%.
Right, right. That brings us to the last category, which is regrouping financially. So what are your recourses financially, and you take a loss? Again, I'm going to let Mark take this, but again, I'm just going to warn again: don't revert into a poverty mindset. Proverbs 6:10-11 says, "A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands, and poverty will come on you like a bandit, and want like an armed man." So what we don't want to do is to go, I'm going to pull into my turtle shell. I'm going to take all of my money out. I'm going to put it in silver and bury it in the field behind my house, and so that nobody can ever hurt me again financially. That is not the right move. So that's what poverty does, or says even worse, well, we don't have any faith in the future, so why don't we blow it? Why don't we just go have a blast because we can't ever believe in the future? No, we're not doing that. We're not going to go into that poverty mindset. We're going to regroup. And so what are some tips for us then on that front, Mark?
I already gave away tip number one, which is either go back to the plan, or if you have never done a plan, then take it as a kick in the butt and say, it's time for me to do a financial plan.
Here.
That's what you and I do all week long is we help people create financial plans. I don't think, Stephen, that your reaction to losing all your crypto is to say, I'm going to take this as an opportunity to buy 5 Bitcoins and put them in a different custodian.
No, it was not.
Yeah, I think that underneath, especially financial losses, is often some stripe of greed. Not always. Sometimes we just go, "Oh, that was a loss," and again, hopefully, we were expecting to take some losses, and this is one of them. But sometimes we can learn from it. So for me, I looked back at this and I said, "Why did I not have more scrutiny on this particular company that I trusted?" And I thought, there's been a theme in some of the situations where I have lost money is that I was looking for yields that were significantly above what the market offers. And that doesn't mean that I shouldn't look for high yielding investments. It does mean that I am learning, hey, there is a risk adjusted rate of return in the world. This is something very few people understand. The people who say, why would you invest in boring stocks when you can make 50% on this thing? Well, they don't understand that there is a risk adjusted rate of return. And if there wasn't, then anytime somebody shows up and says, I'll pay you 15% with no risk, then every institutional investor in the world would jump into that and it would no longer pay 15%.
Yeah.
So there's a risk adjusted rate of return. And I just noticed through reflecting on this particular one, I have been susceptible to saying, well, maybe I'm the only one in the room who's noticing that you can get more over here. That's an opportunity I would take when you experience a loss, which is to say, is there something I can see as a pattern that maybe would help me be better equipped to make good decisions in the future? And, can I just raise a little flag next to this event and say, let this serve as a reminder when a similar opportunity comes along?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes in the wake of a loss, you do have to actually rebuild financially. So if you just lost your whole emergency fund, you need an emergency fund. That might mean taking an extra shift. It might mean getting a job. Let's say that you have been, an entrepreneur and you have a certain amount of income and it works for your family, but it's not quite enough to build up a pool of emergency funds. Well, you need to figure that out.
Right.
And so you might actually need to go experience a little bit of pain and hire yourself out to recoup some of the loss.
Humbling yourself.
Yeah. So I wouldn't be afraid to do that. Maybe it's not going and earning more, but it's sacrificing somewhere else. Hey, we're going to do a national park for vacation this summer instead of Greece. Although traveling abroad right now, very economically viable due to the strength of the dollar. But maybe we'll do a different episode on that. So I think you have to say, and that honestly, that goes back to the plan, which is, was this an exogenous shock to my family's financial situation that needs to be remedied? Or was this a part of the plan and the track that we were on already anticipated bumps like the one I just felt?
I'm looking up the word exogenous.
Oh, from the outside.
Very strong. So at a bare minimum, step one is to go back to review the plan and see where are we. It might be time for rebalancing, right, Mark? If something has gone up and something's gone down, would it might be a time to reshuffle money into various places?
Yes, the crypto was in my super high risk bucket.
Yeah.
If we imagine that it's all gone, which I kind of do, I don't have a whole lot of super high risk money out there. I had some investments in some companies, like direct investments in companies that friends had started, and those have closed out. So honestly, as much as this sounds crazy, one of my steps might be to deploy some risky money because my risky money is no longer there.
Right.
It would be exactly the opposite if I had foolishly been thinking of that as my emergency fund money. Then I would need to actually de-risk myself.
Yes.
But that's kind of one of the things that we do when we're working with families is we look at all of their assets, specifically investments, and say, when we look at all of the different accounts and where it is, including cash, what's the risk profile of this family? What's their unique risk tolerance? Sometimes a big enough shock can actually change your risk tolerance, but
Mm,
usually we think of risk tolerance as kind of more like a personality trait.
right.
And do we need to make any changes when there's a big jolt that occurs? Some people will actually get riskier when this happens. Like if you lost 100 grand and you woke up the next morning and thought, well, that wasn't so bad. You could be tempted to
Let's put
just
it
go
all on
go it
red.
again. Right. So how you'll respond to loss really is going to be different for each person. The point is you need an overarching plan that thinks about, this is the track our family's on when it comes to money, and we're prepared for variance, but we're going to stick with a plan, and not respond and try to pivot and juke based on the events that are most recent in our memories or right in front of our face.
That's great. Well, in closing, I would just tell people that you should give yourself the grace to have a period of time. You should probably define it early on so that your emotions don't declare it, but have a time where you lick your wounds and you reset and you look over your plan. I want to say to everybody, this sounds bizarre because I'm not looking at anybody in the face. As your financial Abrahamic friends, I'm sorry. I know that it's just hard to go through something where you failed, and where something failed and you feel the loss over it. We're with you. I'm sorry. And also, as your friend, I would tell you that it's impossible to go through this life without taking some losses and some defeats and some black eyes and get some dents to your confidence. What we pray for you is that your experience will produce long-term wisdom for you, and you won't, as we said, you won't shrink back, and you won't give up on the Ecclesiastes 11 concept of faithfully distributing money out, because as it says, you don't know what's going to pay off. You don't know what the future brings. And so we just want to be continually, diligently sowing to the faithful belief that prosperity is coming. So those are my closing thoughts. Anything from you, Mark?
Well, I was just thinking we jumped straight into it this week. Um,
Yes.
we didn't banter at all.
No.
Have we ever considered a closing banter?
I'm very open to it. That would be wild. I don't know if the people are prepared for that degree of zaniness, but yeah, we could do it.
Well, you know this. I just said goodbye to 8 children that were under my care because we added a new member to the family in yesterday, I guess. So I had all the cousins over here while their mom, my sister,
You
gave
don't
birth to
mean
a new
by that.
baby.
Okay, I was about to say, you don't mean that you have a new baby. You mean your extended family.
Yeah, extended family.
Yeah.
If I had a new baby, we would have not been doing this if I had a new baby yesterday. But so that was fun news, and we're celebrating a 12th birthday today. So it's kind of a celebration of birth happening over at the Parrot House. That that
That's
that will be
terrific.
the Shabbat theme tonight.
Oh yeah, it's fun to have a little star of the Shabbat and somebody you can celebrate and honor. That's great.
Yep. We'll be having a bunch of preteen girls over here at the same time. So we'll be kind of combining Shabbat and late over, which I don't know if this is a thing for you, but
Ever heard of a
in
late over?
private Christian school land, everybody has kind of agreed with us that we're not big fans of sleepover.
Okay.
So late over is become the thing where people stay at a party until, you know, 11:30 or 12, and then their parents come and pick them up.
Parents pick
And
up 12-year-olds at 11:30.
I hate it. So I'm willing
Wow.
to do it for my child's birthday because that's what she wanted to do. But I'm a big no on others. I'm like, I go to bed at 10 at the latest. So
Uh-huh.
I might be willing to stay up till 10:30 and come pick you up, but that's as late as my late overs go.
Speaking of wonderful celebratory things, uh, tell the people about your sneaker news.
Supposedly, I have been invited to be on the Nike panel where I can tell them things about their shoes. Now, I have not received any invites to say yes to a pair of shoes. So we'll see if it shakes out or not.
And you will be able to tell them after wearing a shoe for a couple of weeks, make your Chinese slaves work harder to make these more profitable or bouncy or comfortable or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm really curious what it's going to look like, because I would love to just be, I mean, you know me, I'm not exactly a fashion icon. This is why sneakers are a hobby, because you can just wear jeans and a t-shirt and have some cool sneakers and people think that you've dressed well.
You're in, yeah. Well, you being in that sneaker world, you're touching on one of the great loves of my life, which is giving my opinion about anything. And the primo example of this in my life, we have a good friend who is a owner of restaurants, and he's a chef. And we got to go to a preview evening when they were trying out the menu. And by the way, this was a modern Mexican restaurant in Cincinnati, so it just couldn't have been more right down my lane. And I got to go to a preview evening, and we were handed out at the preview these like surveys. Give us your thoughts on every dish and what you think of the service and the layout of the place. Oh man, I was in heaven. I got to eat everything on the menu for free and opine all night long about everything. And it's a delight to me. So maybe you can do that some with your shoes and say, I like it, except the way the toe feels when I'm turning left. I don't know about this. That would be delightful.
Yeah. Well, I'll keep you posted. If I get anything, I'll bring it here on the Abraham's Wallet podcast. We are currently 9 subscribers away from 100 subscribers on the YouTube channel.
Uh-huh.
So it'd be nice if people would just go subscribe to us. I have done my part. We had about 20 extra subscribers for a while because whenever we were on vacation and there was like a smart TV that was left logged into someone's YouTube,
kidding.
I would just go ahead and subscribe them to the Abraham's Wallet podcast. If you're out there and that's how you found us, you're welcome.
Yeah.
But it's one of those channels where we see how many people listen to us on audio, and the vast and overwhelming majority of those people listen on the Apple Podcast app, although Spotify is taking ground. But YouTube is a place where I think that it's actually easier for us to share stuff, and there's commenting and things like that. So I would love to see that audience grow. And if you're out there and feeling generous, I don't care if you ever watch it. Just go give us a subscribe.
Yeah, sure. All right.
That's my pitch and promo for the week.
All right. We need 9. Good to know.
We need 9 pitches and promos?
No, you need 9 subscribers.
Yeah. We just need 9
put a
people.
Gold star on your chest.
And then we need 900 after that to get to 1,000, which feels like another benchmark. So either way, you could, if there's 909 of you out there, let's go for 1,000 right now.
Okay.
Lastly, there's going to be some Abraham's Wallet news coming. Is it going to come next week or the following week?
I hope so. That'd be great.
Well, there's big news. So big that we've been sitting on it now for months.
Yes.
And we're so close to birthing this news baby.
That's true. So watch this space for the news baby.
Okay. Until then, see you later.